it's brand mentality at the speed of the consumer. And I think what you're finding is that a lot of institutions now, the people who are in marketing didn't build that company. They didn't build the early manifesto, the ethos, the bedrock or foundation of the product. So they don't have the lineage and history of the company. Like they're people who've been there 2, 3, 5 years. In particular, this environment of the sort of great resignation. So the idea is that they're not as tied as to the historical reference of the brand and its identity. They're more or less trying to keep up with the moment, which means they're more amenable for the speed of the modern day consumer. Meaning you may have brands whose persona, whose mentality is not very suitable for a TikTok environment. So there's a disconnect between the speed of the consumer moving to new platforms and thus consuming new brand affinity, and then how the brand likes to behave. Thus, it moves at a legacy pace versus being modern era, thinking about NFTs, the metaverse, gaming, et cetera, et cetera. And you go on and on and on. I mean, that's the time. So there's usually the brand and its mentality of how it sees itself internally, and then there's the brand mentality of how it needs to behave in the marketplace to keep up with the speed at which consumers are making decisions and breaking down information. And to me, that's the conundrum of sort of where we are. It's okay to know who you are internally as you're in meetings, at corporate events, like looking at your sales kit. But when you show up in market, it is very much the speed of the consumer for what you have to keep up with and sort of mirror that I think is where brands are falling down because they acknowledge that, but they don't really understand how that changes the dynamic of their own behavior at the executional level. Like, hey, we're this company, but based upon the ability to relate to a consumer who wasn't even born when our company was founded, then we don't really relate to them. They grew up in a totally different world, and their brand affinity has a totally different hierarchy and sort of in market related structure. And I think that's the idea of what businesses need to be conscious of and say, hey, it's okay to have an identity, but we need to inherently understand its limitations and what it is and how it's defined and how we have to represent it internally and in the house. But when we show up in market, this is how we have to play in the sandbox to be relevant because there are brands who were literally born there. I mean, there are brands who technically were born at the modern day speed of consumer. A TikTok is, let's say a Spotify is, a Network is, a Complex Mag is, a Refinery 29 is, a Pop Sugar is, a Viceland is, a Marvel is. But you notice I'm going to run out of this list and we're only going to get to about 20, and then we have the rest of the Fortune 50, 10,000 who essentially aren't. That's the thing that has to be shored up in terms of understanding that. We always talk to clients about your brand has limitations. There are places it can't naturally go. Like if you show up, people are like, what are you doing here? But you have to figure out who to align with that can take you that last mile. I don't care if it's an influencer, it's a publisher partner, it's tactical strategy, it could be a tech stack, it could be an acquisition you need to make. It could be the fact that you need a skunk works department or division that does all these cool things that keeps you a little bit edgy. Brands need to just get very real about what is the thing we're missing to close the gap. And I think that's the biggest thing when you start to think about how do you define brand mentality and how it needs to behave today. It's that, because look, these legacy institutions, you're not going to overhaul. You're not going to overhaul their leadership, the chairman of the board, the fact that they're listed on the New York Stock Exchange and instead of issuing NFT or cryptocurrency instead. So, but they have to be like, well, we can be this space here, but over here, we get to be this company, which gives us a cool factor like, wow, that institution went there. I have a different level of respect for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.